When a German Shepherd puppy wrapped his tiny paw around Mark's arm and refused to let go, he knew something was wrong. This wasn't play, it was desperation. Within minutes, Mark would discover the heartbreaking reason this little dog was begging him, and you won't believe what happened next. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The rain had stopped just an hour before Mark pulled into the shelter's gravel parking lot. Inside, the faint hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the chorus of barks echoing off concrete walls. The smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air. Mark hadn't planned on coming here today. He wasn't looking for a dog. He was simply dropping off some blankets he'd found in his garage. Rows of kennels lined the hallway, each filled with wagging tails, eager barks, and hopeful eyes. Dogs of all shapes and sizes pressed their noses against the bars, vying for his attention. Mark offered quick smiles and gentle pats to the most enthusiastic ones as he moved down the row. But when he reached the very last kennel, his steps slowed. Inside, a small German Shepherd puppy sat quietly in the corner. No barking, no bouncing, just a steady, unblinking gaze fixed on him. Mark crouched down, curious. That's when it happened. The puppy stepped forward, slipped one tiny paw through the bars, and wrapped it tightly around his arm. His grip was surprisingly firm, as if to say, "Please, don't leave me." Mark froze, his hand resting gently on the cold metal bars. The puppy's tiny claws pressed into his sleeve, but it wasn't aggressive, it was desperate. Those brown eyes held a mixture of fear and hope, as if this moment was his last chance. Mark felt an odd twist in his chest, something he couldn't quite explain. A shelter worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached quietly. "That's Max," she said softly. "He doesn't do that with anyone." Her tone carried both surprise and caution. She explained that Max rarely approached visitors, preferring to keep his distance. The fact that he had reached out first was unusual, almost unheard of. Mark glanced back at the puppy. Max's ears twitched, but his paw didn't loosen its grip. His gaze searched Mark's face as if trying to read his intentions. The shelter worker added, "He's been through a lot. I think he's still waiting for someone he can trust." Mark swallowed hard. He told himself it was just a puppy being friendly, but deep down, he knew this was different. Max wasn't just asking for a pat on the head. He was holding on, like his life depended on it. And maybe, in some way, it did. Mark's fingers brushed lightly over the soft fur on Max's paw, feeling the slight tremble running through it. "What happened to him?" he asked quietly. The shelter worker hesitated, glancing toward the other volunteers before lowering her voice. "It's not an easy story." She crouched beside him, her gaze shifting between Mark and the small, silent German Shepherd. Max had been found weeks earlier on the side of a rural road during a violent thunderstorm. A driver spotted him lying in a ditch, soaked to the bone and shivering so hard he could barely lift his head. When rescuers arrived, they discovered he was limping from an untreated leg injury and dangerously underweight. His ribs showed beneath his wet fur, and his eyes, they looked empty. The shelter staff nursed him back to physical health, but his spirit seemed locked away. He rarely barked, barely played, and often sat in the farthest corner of his kennel. Foster families tried to help, but Max would hide, refusing food for days. Eventually, he was brought back here, where most assumed he had simply given up. Mark's chest tightened as he imagined the tiny pup alone in that storm, waiting for someone who never came. Now, here he was, paw gripping Mark's arm as if afraid history would repeat itself. In that moment, the shelter's fluorescent lights seemed colder, the hum louder. Mark realized this wasn't just a random encounter. For Max, this might be the last chance to believe in people again. Mark stayed crouched in front of the kennel, feeling the weight of Max's grip like an anchor. A part of him wanted to scoop the puppy up right there and never let go. But reality pressed in. Long work hours, an apartment with strict pet rules, and a life that didn't leave much room for surprises. Could he really give this puppy the kind of home he deserved? Max shifted closer, pressing his nose through the bars to nuzzle Mark's sleeve. His small, warm breath against Mark's skin made it harder to think logically. The shelter worker stood silently nearby, giving him space, but Mark could feel her eyes on him, hopeful, maybe even pleading. He could almost hear Max saying, "Don't walk away. Not again." Mark sighed, patting Max's paw gently. "I'll think about it," he murmured, his voice low. Slowly, he began to stand, the puppy's paw loosening only slightly. As Mark took a step back, Max let out a soft whine, a sound so full of longing it stopped him mid-step. But after a moment, Mark turned toward the exit, telling himself he needed time to decide. Still, that quiet, desperate whimper followed him all the way to the door. Mark's hand was already on the shelter's glass door when it happened. A sharp, heart-wrenching cry echoed from behind him. High-pitched, desperate, and impossible to ignore. He turned instinctively. Max was on his hind legs, paws pressed against the bars, barking and whining in a frantic rhythm. His small body shook with every sound, as if he were pouring every ounce of himself into one final plea. The shelter lobby fell silent. Visitors paused mid-conversation, their eyes drawn to the commotion. The worker from before hurried to the kennel, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He's never done this before. Not for anyone." Max's claws scraped against the metal, his gaze locked solely on Mark. It wasn't anger, it was panic. Mark stood frozen, his chest tightening with each bark. Logic told him to leave, to think it over, but his heart was already making the decision for him. Slowly, he walked back down the row of kennels. As he knelt, Max instantly quieted, pressing his paw back onto Mark's arm like it belonged there. The shelter worker smiled faintly. "I think he's chosen you," she whispered. And in that moment, Mark knew, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he couldn't walk away again. Mark didn't bother asking for more time. The answer had already been written in the puppy's trembling paw and unblinking gaze. "Let's do the paperwork," he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. The shelter worker's eyes lit up as she hurried to fetch the adoption forms. Max stayed pressed against the bars, watching Mark as if afraid he might vanish. Minutes later, Mark signed his name for the last time. The worker opened the kennel, and Max hesitated only for a heartbeat before leaping into his arms. His small body was warm, his heartbeat rapid against Mark's chest. As they stepped toward the exit, Max clung tightly, refusing to be set down. Outside, the cool air wrapped around them. Mark opened the car door, but Max wouldn't sit in the passenger seat. He climbed into Mark's lap, curling up as if he'd finally found where he belonged. During the drive, his head rested on Mark's arm, eyes half closed but alert to every movement. When Mark glanced in the rearview mirror, he caught sight of the shelter workers at the doorway. One of them discreetly wiped a tear. They all knew this wasn't just a happy adoption. This was a rescue for both of them. That first night, Max explored the apartment with cautious steps, sniffing corners and pausing at every sound. Mark had laid out a soft bed in the living room, but Max kept circling back to sit beside him on the couch, as if afraid he might disappear. Mark spoke to him in a calm, steady voice, offering small pieces of food from his hand. Slowly, Max's tail gave a tentative wag, the first sign of trust. When Mark got up to grab a blanket, Max followed close behind, his tiny paws patting softly on the floor. Later, as the room grew quiet, Max curled up at Mark's feet, eyes half shut, but still watching. Mark realized then, this wasn't just a dog adjusting to a new home. This was a soul learning, one moment at a time, that it was finally safe to stay. Weeks turned into months, and Max was no longer the timid, silent puppy Mark had first met. Every evening, he raced to the door at the sound of Mark's keys, tail wagging like a banner of pure joy. Their home echoed with laughter, barks, and the quiet comfort of shared trust. One night, as Max rested his head on Mark's knee, Mark realized the truth. He hadn't just rescued a dog. Max had rescued him, too. That desperate paw through the bars hadn't been a plea for help alone. It had been the beginning of a bond neither of them would ever let go.